Brewing Network.
All right. Hey, everybody. How you doing out there? How you feeling? Feeling good?
Yeah, we're good.
It's a bit warm. Thanks, Evan. Evan's great. You know what? And that's what matters. I always just worry about Evan here. Thanks for being here. If you're wandering around the outside, come grab a seat. We're going to bring you beer probably right now. It's about to head out and get poured into your glass. Oh, they're already out there doing it. So welcome to the Brewers Studio. My name's Justin Crosley. I'm from the Brewing Network, and I am lucky enough to get to do this every year. And this is, I hang out and kind of drink beer all day, and then for 45 minutes at a time, I interview some of the best brewers on earth. Then I go drink beer, and then I come back and I interview some brewers, and then I go drink beer. It's a pretty good gig, right, Evan?
Great gig.
Yeah.
Great gig.
Like, I know you like your job, but my job's a little better, I think.
I think your job's better.
It's just a little better. All right, so today we are talking about, here we go, are you ready? We're talking about thiolized yeast. Now, when I got this topic through my email, I was like, oh man, I need a nap. I just woke up. But the truth is, this is about you hop lovers and you hop heads out there. And it's kind of the new stuff that's happening that brewers are learning, and beer's come a long way. Like, you guys have always been cool, but you're cooler than ever because you're starting to use technology and all sorts of things to make the beer that we really like. And so that's what this topic is about. And joining me today, next to me, of course, is Evan Price from Green Cheek Beer Company. Have you heard of that place? Yeah.
Hi, Dustin.
Yeah. They've won a medal or 3 before. Evan's pretty good at what he does. Jos Ruffell from Garage Project is here.
Woo!
Yeah. Yeah. When you walk around the fest, there's only a couple booths with a really long line that goes around everything. One of those is Jos's. Partly because he takes a really long time. He like pours smoke in his beer while he's it's a whole thing. Yeah. Laura Burns from Omega Yeast is here.
Woo!
Yeah. And I'm so glad to have Laura here because, of course, we're talking about yeast. And then finally, you know, we got to have some Firestone Walker representation, and Sam Tierney is here from Firestone Walker. Yeah. So before we dive into the thiolized beer, Sam, just give us a brief talk about Hypnosis, which is what you guys are drinking right now.
So yeah, Hypnosis is a modern West Coast IPA, and we thought this was a good one to start off because we actually ferment this with a lager yeast strain at a slightly elevated temperature, and that creates a really clean canvas for the hops to express themselves, and it's a blend of some American and New Zealand hop varieties in there. So, just kind of set your palate right now and think, this is what an IPA with a very, very minimal amount of yeast character is giving you. So the yeast really isn't doing much. It's creating a canvas, a very light base layer for the hops to do their thing. And then as we'll see with the beers after this, we have varying levels of yeast expression and how yeast can affect the aromatics of a hoppy beer.
And so I love this topic because yeast has always obviously affected the flavor profile of beer, but not always the hop profile, right? And so that's what we're getting into with this. And so, Evan, I'm going to lean on you a little bit, you and Laura, actually, to kind of explain to us what thiolized yeast is and why it affects the hops while we pour the next beer, which I think is going to be, are we going to do Dreaming? Yeah. Dreaming of Happy?
Yeah. Josh, how do you say that? Do you say happy or hoppy? Like,
you say hoppy. It's Tereo Mari for hops.
Yeah.
Okay, hoppy. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah, Garage Project did this fantastic festival or symposium in New Zealand. Laura was there. Joss, of course, was there because Garage Project put it on. And I've been dreaming of not only New Zealand, but the beers that I had, the conversations that I had. And so this first beer that you're going to be getting, I guess, after this first beer. So your second beer.
But your first thiolized yeast beer, right?
No, so the first beer is, yeah. So the first we wanted to do a comparison, and so one of the things that we did with this beer, as we talked with Joss and also Laura, was we took a beer and we split it into 2 different tanks, and so it's the same exact beer in every way, other than the one change is going to be the yeast. the first one that you're having is going to be using a yeast strain that is your typical hazy yeast that you see in most beers. This not only promotes that haze that you're used to, but it also has a bunch of like kind of peach skin, tangerine quality to it from this yeast. So there's definitely some fruit character coming from it. But me and Laura went back and forth about sort of the best base beer to create to really highlight this other yeast strain that we'll be getting to here momentarily in order to really highlight the thiols and unlock them further. And so
what were the keys to that base beer that you guys came up with?
Yeah, so it's a 100% barley base beer, which isn't anything that we ever do at Green Cheek for a hazy IPA. Normally, we are using like 60% barley, and then it's the other 40% is a mix of rolled oats or old-fashioned oats and unmalted wheat. But Laura, I think could speak further about why we ended up going 100% barley for this specific beer.
Yeah, so surprisingly, the yeast are unlocking these compounds, these thiol compounds, from other raw materials that brewers use all the time. So barley is one of those raw materials that has a ton of precursor that's similar to the precursors that are in hops. They just never get unlocked. So barley is basically the base of the beer that allows all the flavor expression by the yeast. So we went with 100% barley because the oats and the wheat aren't giving any precursor. And then just to give a little bit of background on what the yeast is doing, there are these compounds that are produced in plants, and they're basically just through normal metabolism, a response to sometimes UV stress or other things, and they accumulate in the plant. And while hops ripen, these flavor compounds are released from those precursors. So thiols are those flavor compounds that people recognize as very fruity, tropical in hops, and especially with New Zealand hops. So that's one of the other things about this recipe is we leaned on New Zealand hops to bring in that other thiol component and really build up this more intense version of a thiolized beer.
Yeah, so we had that barley as that base, and then the other thing that we had is Jos here has a side gig known as Phantasm, and do you want to talk about the Mega Motueka that we used in this?
Yeah, so Phantasm is a ingredient that is made from New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc grape marc, and it's rich in these thiol precursor compounds. We make it available for brewers to use in the hot side, and they can load in more natural precursors. And we also do these thiol-enriched hop products. So this is a blend of high precursor lots of freestyle motueka, co-palletized with Phantasm. We call it Mega Motueka. So it's sort of like a all-in-one slug that you can put into your hot side, and you get all the hop precursors and then the enriched precursors from Phantasm as well.
And then the yeast takes hold of these precursors that you've unlocked. That's basically what we're getting at, right?
Right. So just like thiol compounds are unlocked during the ripening of a hop cone, the yeast are doing that same process. They're just releasing the thiols from the precursors, similar to how that happens during ripening.
And so the beer that you have in front of you right here is it's an example of a hazy IPA that we make. We are utilizing that Mega Motueka from Freestyle and Phantasm. This ends up with really like honestly, I think the yeast character this is a lighter dry hop for us, really to try to showcase yeast in this. So normally we're going a little bit more aggressive on this, but for this specific panel, we thought it'd be fun just to try to
rein it in a little.
Well, like try to show off each ingredient a little bit.
But it's not really reined in. It's so piney and hoppy and wonderful. Like it's already. This is what I think's funny about brewers and us consumers too. This is already a beautifully hoppy, hop present, hop forward, piney, flowery beer. And you're like, yeah, but what else can we do? Like, let's go further with the yeast.
That's always how it goes. Yes.
I think it's a great start. This one.
Yeah. And so then the next beer that we have coming is going to be the sort of the example of unlocking all of these really tropical fruity characters that are already there, but that are present, but you need a specific ingredient like this yeast from Omega in order to unlock that and express them further. And so, like, Jos, you want to talk about the levels of, like, you know, what they go from to what they become?
Yeah, so with Phantasm, we sort of talk about it being a lock and a key. So you have your precursor potential, which is the lock, but if you don't have the right key, the yeast, you won't unlock those fantastic free thiols. The main thiols we're looking at are 3SH and 3SHA. They're really distinct tropical aromas. 3SHA is just pure passion fruit. So when you're smelling passion fruit, that is what you are experiencing. The levels in these, and we haven't tested this particular beer, but from previous trials we've done looking at a fermentation and Microbiologist and this type of yeast, you know, you'll be unlocking maybe 1 to 200 nanograms per liter of 3SH. The detectable threshold of these compounds is incredibly low because they're very potent. And Laura has a great stat around this that you know, if you put a drop in a Olympic-sized swimming pool, you would be able to detect it. And how big is an Olympic-sized swimming pool?
21,000 barrels. That's like most of it. Regional breweries like annual production. So
one
wild.
drop.
One drop. And so the detectable for 3SH around 60 nanograms. When we move on to the next beer, we'll be looking at anywhere from 5 to 10,000 nanograms per liter of 3SH. So you should see experience an immediate difference in the sensory.
Yeah, what's the math there? Like, 300 times more?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably, like, with hops alone, you're getting around, like, 20 times the amount of thiols that are above sensory threshold, but you're getting to, like, 200, 300 with the addition of the yeast, too.
That's insane.
Yeah. So I'm sort of afraid to ask the next question, and I didn't know how to ask the next question except to say, how? Like, how did you guys figure this out? That, oh, we can make a yeast that unlocks all of these. That's the key to unlocking, as Jos said, all of these styles that we know our consumers and our brewers want. Like, where, who, what, and how did that happen?
Honestly, a lot of the inspiration for the beginning of our Thiolized project was New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc wine. Okay. So in the grapes, in the wine, yeast actually naturally release these precursors into free thiols, and that's why Sauvignon Blanc wine has such, like, massive tropical fruit aromas, especially New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So yeah, a lot of the wine literature that had been digging into the science behind it kind of helped us get our start and understand how to approach it in beer. Because it's a very different, beer's a whole different matrix, and it affects the way the yeast metabolize those. So.
And the fact that it's not naturally in the beer, you have to create this thing to put in the beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Which you did in your lab.
Yes, we did.
Amazing. I don't know. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, it was a long process of, you know, it truly was bench research, and Jos and I collaborated a lot with understanding Phantasm and the amount of precursors we could bring in with other raw materials, and, you know, it's been fun. It's been 2 years of, like, really intense study.
Okay, so we should now maybe be pouring the second one if we haven't already, which is forcing nature's hand, right?
Yeah,
which is exactly what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, we're forcing nature's hand in this whole situation. You know, what'd you say? Oh, thank you. He said great name. You know, no big deal.
He's like, no, I just read the manual that Laura sent.
So just as a fun story too, last year Sam was brewing with a bunch of these strains too on special projects for the Invitational. So everybody might have already tried some of these thiolized beers last year at the festival, and it's definitely been something that brewers have been able to take hold of and apply and make some really interesting beers. So happy to be here in another example of a...
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring that up too. I actually wanted to ask how long this technology is. Can I call it technology? How long it's been around? It's only a couple years, right?
Yeah, I think our launch of our first thiolized yeast was in 2020. Yeah.
Got it.
So it's new, very new.
Yeah.
And actually, the funny history of the thiols themselves, like the compounds weren't even identified because they're at such low levels. I think the first one in passion fruit was identified in 1998. So 3SH wasn't even known as a compound until it was identified out of passion fruit, which is pretty fascinating too.
Can you give us a couple other examples? I don't want to put you on the spot, but compounds that we know, like I might say piney or citrus, right? But these are known compounds. Like I thought it'd be fun to teach us what some of these are.
Well, I mean, on the thiol side, there's really 3SH, 3SHA, 4SMP, and we're starting to see that appear in some fermentations now with some of the new, more concentrated Phantasm lots, and that's a sort of anywhere from a cashy blackcurrant, brings a sort of extra complexity. There's precursors in hops like 3S4 Impol. And then the great thing about thiols at the moment is there's a lot we don't actually know. So there's undiscovered thiols. There's things out there that we haven't really identified yet. But thiols are just one part of the puzzle on top of esters and terpene, monoterpene alcohols as well. So maybe Sam wants to talk through some of those.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying, beer is this incredibly complex matrix of compounds, and it's astronomical the amount of chemicals we're talking about that create the flavor of the beer that you're drinking in your glass. And a lot of them are aromatic compounds that also are going to be affected by the different flavors you're getting, the mouthfeel, everything like that. So it's a really complicated puzzle, and thiols are this really fascinating piece that I think we're really geeking out on right now. And brewers are currently working on the best ways to integrate them in. And so this is all about finding that right level, that balance, that how does this add to a beer that's really compelling to drink, that makes flavors that we want to keep coming back to. I think as brewers, we can't help ourselves. We have to explore, we have to keep going. And this is one of those frontiers that we're currently exploring. And, I don't know, we get so excited about it. And I don't know, I think everybody's doing it right now because of that, because you think, oh, this is really cool. This is something that we haven't seen before, and it's really fascinating. I was just telling Laura last night that, the frontier of the beer making process right now, a lot of that is being driven on the ingredient side. A lot of it's, new hop products, stuff like Phantasm, new yeast technology. So, it's a really exciting time.
I think what's really interesting is we, as Laura mentioned, there's been a lot of work done in the wine industry. They've been very focused on thiols for a long time. And for beer, it's relatively new, but we're progressing at an insane rate because brewers, they want to take risks, they want to try new ingredients, they want to push boundaries, and we can fire off ferments every day of the week, whereas winemakers are inherently a lot more risk adverse because they get one chance a year. So that's really cool. We're starting to see things really accelerate, and I think our learning and understanding in the next couple of years will probably eclipse what the wine industry managed to achieve. And the other thing is, as Sam's pointing out, it's not just a straight picture of saying like, hey, throw thiols in your beer and it'll be great. They did a study where they took Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and actually broke it down into its constituent pieces, deodorized the wine, and then sort of rebuilt it back. And then they brought back the 3SHA. In theory, the passion fruit should have just returned, and it didn't. And it turned out it was very reliant on having terpenes there as well, and esters. And so it's a very complex puzzle that we're trying to solve, and we still don't have all the answers to.
And that if it occurs naturally, it's different than adding it, I think is like the fine point there. So by the way, like the reason we're talking about thiols, and I'm asking about these different flavors that also have a compound, this isn't unknown in the food and drink world. So if you've ever had fast food, most of the flavors and smells of fast food were created in a lab. I'm sorry if that's news to you. But it's not a bad thing necessarily. They just know, oh, we love this particular smell. We love this particular compound, and that's why those French fries are so wonderful to us when we smell them being baked or fried. A lot of that is adding compounds directly to the food. And it's not harmful. I'm not saying like we're being killed by fast food. I'm just saying there's a science behind it. So for brewers to like start to understand the science and do it naturally, I think is a very it's a cool thing to do, and it's not unknown to us. We don't know it's happening until we do a panel like this and we're telling you it's happening, but it's really you guys accentuating the things we already know and love. like pine, like citrus, like whatever it might be, like dank now is the favorite, right? So anyway, this beer, as soon as I put it to my nose, is completely different than the other beer. But the base is the same, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So as you're getting that third pour now, that comparison is pretty insane, at least for me and maybe the panel here. And this is just a change in the yeast strain, like we've been talking about. And so it's, I think of this as far as these like levels of thiols or this intensity, like drinking from the fire hose, where it's just hitting you at such an intense level that you may or may not be into it. Like it may be too polarizing for you, or maybe the best thing that you've ever tasted. But I think that it's just like it's just such a fun like side by side to see. When you get together with wonderful people like Laura and Jos, you can learn a lot and have a great time doing it.
So Evan said something to me before. We weren't able to do it because you only have one glass, but Evan was saying he doesn't even love the full thiolized yeast version just as it is because it's so intense. You prefer like a blend.
I prefer a blend personally, and I think this is something that we'll be working on as brewers to like sort of rein this in. I was working on blends of the non-thiolized version that you had right before this beer. I'm using about 3 parts of that to only 1 part of this. And I think at that level, there's a really wonderful passion fruit character that I think is, appropriate. It's maybe like the bad thing to use, but it ends up just not being so intense. But
this one's almost a cocktail, like a passion fruit cocktail.
Well, again, if you look at the wine world, blending is very common. So, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is a massively blended wine, and they'll have thiol bomb tanks and identify these really punchy tanks and then use them to sort of blend across a wider range and just sort of hit that sweet spot. Yeah. So I think as brewers, we sort of, we're quite used to having this sort of immaculate conception of a tank that comes out and it's like everything all in one.
Why doesn't that happen every time?
Well, I think the other thing to just say to the audience, the point was to make a very obvious difference here. We went for the thiol bomb tank. Like that was the goal here. So brewers have figured it out in a lot of ways where they're blending either post-fermentation. We have other versions of the strains that don't express as high that become a little bit more melded. And also blending the yeast to the original strain is like cutting it in half or, whatever ratio you're using. And, going with 60% barley would have cut it in half almost, Yeah. So there's so many tricks that brewers have figured out and are working on their recipe development that, we went to like 11 here. And that's the point. We wanted you guys to see that. But there's definitely a lot of ways to bring it right into that level where you're seeing nuance and it's not taking over.
Sure. All right, so I know we weren't doing like a do you like this one or do you like that one? But I'm curious if you like this one or that one. So by show of hands, the first beer you had was kind of the mellow, non-thiolized yeast. The second one was like Omega Mega beer.
Hey, that's actually a beer name.
Is it Omega Mega?
That was a WeldWorks collab with Mega Matsueka.
Damn, I thought I just made that up. All right, by show of hands, do you prefer the first one or the second one? Number 1. Yeah, okay. Oh, not that many. Number 2. Yeah, you guys want all those things in your face. So I think that follows what consumers are liking about hazy beer, about hop forward beer, about just give us the new hop strain. Like we just kind of want it in our face. So
it's a fun project to work through in your sensory too, because if you didn't like it, there might be more to it. You might be perceiving it differently, and sensory is just complicated. So don't feel bad if you didn't like it. Some people aren't gonna like it. I don't love a ton of the 4-vinyl guaiacol in a beer, the clove character, but some people do. So we all figure it out. It's okay if you don't like it.
I love so much learning the names of flavors I know, like clove. Like you just taught me what the flavor of clove, what that compound is. I'm always like, oh yeah, I've been tasting that my whole life. I fucking hate it. What's the Jaeger compound? I think that's clove also. Can you give me the Jaeger? That's just puke.
There is a just to get it back to like the origin. A lot of these compounds you're getting in beer come from other ingredients, and so a lot of terpenes come from plants like mint or pine. Pinene is that pine compound that you're talking about. Yeah, pinene. Yep.
That's no fun. It's not like a weird chemical name to it. It's just pining.
Well, you don't have to get too creative sometimes.
Okay, all right.
3SH makes it too complicated. Yeah. So we have to abbreviate it.
I prefer.
Go ahead, Sam.
I'll say I prefer the easy, terpenes, limonene, pinene, citronellol. They're very self-explanatory. Yeah. This, once you get into the thiols, I'm just like, every time we have these conversations, I have to like double check with them. So with 3SHMP, whatever, it's hard. I mean, even for brewers that are trying to get into this, it's a whole new lingo, and it's a bit intimidating. So I don't expect anyone to know it.
No, you don't. But what I'm saying is it's a good lingo because it's something that we all know. We don't know the compound behind it, but we all know if you tell us what it tastes like, everybody here is like, oh yeah, no, I've tasted that and I like it, or I don't like it. I know this that I like in food or beer. I know this that I like in food and beer.
Yeah.
So and it's science, but it's also simple.
And that's a great point. All of this eventually will just fade into the background because at the end of the day, a customer wants to know that they love a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. They don't need to know,
You need to know, but we don't all need to know.
Yeah. It's like, they want to see the sausage. They don't want to know how it's made.
Exactly right. Yeah. Also a beer name, by the way. I think we should make it. If we do a collab, can we call it? We don't need to know.
Ideas are hard to come by these days. Yeah. We'll take it.
If anybody has any questions, come up front. I'll give you a microphone. You can ask these folks too. Looks like we got one already. Before we run out of time, make sure that everybody gets to ask. I'm going to hold the mic though. Okay, yeah.
This may be an unfair question since we're at a beer festival, but several of you have touched upon it. Is there any potential for Phantasm and similar compound thiols in other culinary areas beyond beer and wine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've run trials in wine, and it delivers free thiols and can drastically increase them. We've heard from cider makers using it. We've heard from people playing around with kombucha and other drinks. As long as there's some form of fermentation. I mean, we've even had people asking us about whether it would work in a soy sauce. So as long as there's the fermentation to sort of get that lock and key mechanism happening, it could work in all sorts of areas.
And also, thiols are pretty recognizable compounds in other food materials, and so even coffee is a big one. Yeah, the same skunk character in beer is this 3-MBT, which is found in wheat as well. Those are just the same compounds in different contexts. So yeah, thiols exist on so many levels in different foods, and they are kind of characteristic and signature for those aromas.
I'm going to get 3-MBT tattooed to my neck after this panel.
Yeah, Tim Wallen, Hop Technic. What's your third favorite thiol?
Oh, your third favorite. Laura?
You know what? The rhubarb character is something very unique, and I think there is a very rhubarby component to thiols sometimes. So that's supposed to be the 3S4M Paul. It's just less of a heavy hitter for what you'd want in an IPA, but it's definitely adding to nuance and interesting. So that's probably third on mine.
Anybody else want to answer the third, or just Laura?
Hello. My question is, have you experimented with thiolized yeast in non-IPA style beers, like maybe a grisette, for example, and how did you like the results?
That's a great question. Last year we
Clearly he works for Evan.
Thank you, Dustin. No, last year we did the Invitational beer with Firestone, and we made this hoppy grisette, and we used some of the Omega thiolized yeast in that beer. So if you had that hoppy grisette last year and you enjoyed that, you were having a thiolized beer then, which is one of the, I think, stokes to the fire to how this whole thing kind of happened this time. But we absolutely use the Phantasm in that. We use the Omega yeast, and so this is not the first one. Justin, thank you.
Not the first ever.
You got
So as you get more and more technology, it seems like the palette is expanding beyond belief. I know it used to be that hops were kind of just something that you added to alter the flavor of the base beer, but now you can make any pumpkin pie and passion fruit and all these things. Has it changed how the brewers, the brewmasters, organize their thoughts into a beer? Are you now picking a flavor profile and then finding all the tools to make it happen, or are you still kind of trial and erroring your way to it?
Sam?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because you can kind of think of it in two phases. It's like your fermentation's your primary flavor, and then you have secondary treatments you can do to a beer later, adding flavors. So, we'll add usually things like spices, vanilla, chocolate, things like that. We're adding post-fermentation to a finished beer. We already know what the flavor profile is going to be. I guess traditionally sometimes we do like Belgian-style beers. We'll add spices on the hot side. So, there's a bit, but usually we know the flavor profile we're going for there. It's a more classic style. But when we get more experimental, we like to add things later on. So I think when you're talking about yeast, it's a little fundamentally different because now you have a whole batch and that's the flavor. And so you start as it's kind of like a tool, a building block you can use, like we were talking about with like blending or whatnot. So yeah, it's a bit different. I think right now it's still this experimental phase where breweries are really figuring that out. But I think, Laura already kind of answered a little bit about how breweries are blending or, even blending yeast strains, so you can use, to turn up or turn down the expression, you can use more or less of the yeast in a single fermentation. So it's not even an all or, one or the other proposition, it can be whatever you want. So I think that, it's definitely at this point, it's one of those things where people are dialing in exactly what they want and looking for that flavor because we know we love the flavor when it hits that sweet spot, right? And that's different for everybody. I think that's the thing. And I love this beer with this high thiol expression. I think it's really cool. But it is a very specific flavor, and it does also diminish the expression of the hops somewhat. You don't get that pure varietal character. So if you're looking for, I want a beer that just has a varietal Nelson character, too much fermentation character will take away from that. So you have to kind of holistically approach it from the beginning and say, how am I going to get to the result I want? And, what's this beer going to do for me? So, yeah, it depends.
I think it's also getting more out of your raw materials as well. And it's pretty interesting that there's this hidden world of aroma to a lot of these hops and materials. And if you're not fermenting them in a particular way, you just won't experience them. So if you think about all the breeding programs around the world for hops, very few of them are actually measuring for thiol precursors or even fermenting to express and see what they're there. And so, I think the next few years are going to be fascinating as we start to see that come online and we start to see hops being sort of really bred in a way to accentuate some of these compounds in higher levels.
Our next panel is about the evolution of the IPA, and one of the things I know that Vinny is going to say is, back in the day, we didn't have all this fancy hop shit. We made hoppy beers with what we had, and so the technology and the new hop varieties that are being bred for these purposes, it's kind of incredible. Another question?
Well, I'll just add that.
Yeah, my question, it goes back to blending, right? So my question is, do you have any concern, is it better to blend post-fermentation because you have established flavor profiles that you can meter in, or is there any concern when you're doing a single fermentation yeast blended thing of a certain strain dominating the other? And so my question to you is, how would you prefer to blend thiolized yeast? Is that post or pre-fermentation?
Just as the effect in a sense for science is, so the blend itself is the thiolized version of the strain. You have that strain and it's identical in its fermentation character. So you can blend back to that parent strain that you made the thiolized yeast from, and they're going to act identical in fermentation, and they're going to pitch into the next batch the same ratio. So that's effective. It's really a easy tool just to blend the yeast. And so with Evan, if he's doing his post-fermentation blending and he's got a good idea of what he wants, he can do that target on his yeast blend and try to dial it in that way. But it's definitely...
I was going to say the same exact thing.
Which is the winemaker's way to do it, post. The first time I ever experienced blending beer was with Firestone, actually. I got invited to one of the anniversary beer blendings. and it was all winemakers. Firestone, Matt, the brewmaster, he didn't invite, I don't think there was a single brewer there. He invited winemakers to come blend all of his beer to make the anniversary batch. And I had never experienced that. And by the way, the winemakers were so good at it. I was there as media, so they let me sit in the corner and have my little glasses. And it took me so long to make my blend. Winemakers, taste, blend. They were so fast at it. It's part of their art, right? So this kind of post-fermentation blend has been going on for a long time. It just was uncouth to do for brewers. But Firestone Anniversary Ale is always a blend of wonderful Firestone beers. And now brewers every day, like Evan, are just well, why don't I just do that with my IPA? I don't have to wait till the end of the year to do. But it's been common, is sort of what I'm saying. But I never saw it before until I went to a Firestone Anniversary blending. So yay winemakers helping us beer folks. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Come on.
Yes, sir. Just if you had a microbiologist on staff for free, say she was getting her master's in the fall and she needed to come up with a research project with beer, specifically yeast, what would you recommend to her?
Like what kind of projects and stuff, or applying to the industry?
The whole dissertation?
If you could get a niche project, you're I'll never get to that because it's not going to be profitable right now, but there's some crazy girl in Solano County that just wants to go hard and she'll do it.
I think the more difficult projects that take a lot of dedication are finding native yeast strains that make interesting character in beer. That's a really fun one. You have to have some diligence and some screening methods to narrow in on things that would be useful. That's kind of cool aspect of hey, I could do this in my spare time, but also I'm really interested in it. And yeah, capturing wild yeast would be a fun one. Yeah, and I mean, even you can take other fermentations like wine or sourdough or kombucha or whatever, to kind of source some of those things. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask ChatGPT that question. It was a really good.
It was a good question.
It's a good chat. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we got one more? Yeah. We got time.
So this is an end of the world scenario question. There's a research facility in I think Norway that holds seeds of wheat crops and things in case of the end of the world, so that we can repopulate does anyone on the panel know if they have seeds of various hop crops there stored, and if not, what do we need to do to make sure that they do?
That's a good question. Apocalypse Now.
Didn't that place flood or something?
Don't say that, Jos. That's
the permafrost melted and it started flooding. Yeah.
The whole world is in his hands. So I guess it's over, bro.
The microorganisms will survive. That'll be the first thing that populates the earth again. So at least we'll have the yeast.
Is that our answer? Is that a good enough answer for you? Yeah, I think it's good enough. Yeah. All right, thanks to our panel. Thanks to you guys for hanging out. But please, Evan, Jos, Laura, and Sam, you guys are wonderful.
I want to thank Evan for making such great examples for you guys to taste. He executed no other. I'm very happy, and it was really fun to work with him.
Evan hates praise, but he's really good at what he does. Yeah. No, you guys are wonderful. I'm actually really appreciative. I learned a bunch today. I've been doing this for 18 years, so it's really cool to learn new things from y'all, and thank you for doing that. And thank you guys for hanging out. We got another panel coming up in a few minutes with Vinny Chilurzo is going to be up here. Matt Brynelson from Firestone is going to be up here, and we're going to talk about the evolution of the IPA. Thanks to our folks here.
The Brewing Network.